In 1971, the Crenshaw family moved into an old farmhouse near Boggy Creek in Miller County, Arkansas, expecting nothing more than cheap land and a fresh start. But their dogs began disappearing one by one. Their livestock grew skittish, refusing to graze near the tree line. Then came the night something massive struck their house with enough force to crack the foundation. What followed over the next 3 weeks would leave them fleeing the property and swearing in court documents about what they witnessed. So before we continue, please make sure to leave a like and let us know where you're watching from. Thanks. My father bought the property in March of 1971, 40 acres of bottomland along Boggy Creek, for less than half what comparable parcels cost up north. We drove down from Indiana in 2 vehicles, Dad's truck pulling a trailer of furniture, Mom following in our station wagon with me and my younger sister Sarah. I was 16 then, old enough to recognize desperation dressed up as opportunity, but young enough to keep my mouth shut about it. The farmhouse sat on a small rise above the flood line, a 2-story clapboard structure that hadn't seen fresh paint since the 50s. A wraparound porch sagged at one corner where the foundation had settled. The barn stood 50 yards behind the house, its doors hanging askew on rusted hinges. Past that, thick woods pressed in from 3 sides, leaving only the muddy access road as a clear path to civilization. Dad walked the property line that first day while we unloaded boxes. He came back with his boots caked in black mud and a satisfied expression. "Good soil," he said. "Previous owner let it go wild, but nothing we can't fix." Mom nodded from the porch steps, where she sat watching Sarah chase grasshoppers through the tall weeds. The previous owner, we'd learned from the realtor, had left suddenly the year before, breaking his lease and forfeiting his deposit. The property had sat empty since. We brought 3 dogs with us: Duke, a German shepherd who'd been with us 8 years, Molly, a beagle mix Mom had rescued, and Bear, Sarah's black lab puppy. They explored the property with tails high that first afternoon, marking territory and investigating 1,000 new smells. By evening, though, they'd all gathered on the porch, whining to come inside. Dad laughed it off. "City dogs," he said. "They'll adjust." The first week passed in a blur of repairs and unpacking. Dad patched the roof while I helped clear brush from around the house. Mom scrubbed decades of grime from the kitchen while Sarah organized her room, hanging horse posters on walls that still smelled of old wallpaper paste. The nearest neighbors, the Washburns, lived 2 miles down the creek. Mrs. Washburn brought a casserole on our 3rd day, staying just long enough to be polite. "You folks settling in all right?" she asked, glancing toward the tree line. "Just fine," Mom answered. "It's peaceful out here." Mrs. Washburn's smile tightened. "That it is. You need anything, you call, day or night." It was Duke who disappeared first. 10 days after we'd arrived, I let the dogs out at dawn like always. Molly and Bear came back for breakfast. Duke didn't. We searched all morning, calling his name through the woods until our voices went hoarse. Dad found tracks leading toward the creek, Duke's familiar prints in the mud, then nothing, like he'd simply vanished mid-stride. "Probably chasing deer," Dad said, but his jaw stayed clenched. Duke had never run off before, not once in 8 years. That night, something screamed in the woods. Not a dog's howl or a wildcat's cry, something deeper, longer, almost human, but not quite. It started low, rose to a piercing shriek, then fell to a guttural rumble that seemed to shake the windows. Sarah ran to my room, Bear trembling beside her. We sat on my bed, listening to Mom and Dad's muffled voices from their room. The sound came again 20 minutes later, closer to the house. Molly crawled under my bed and wouldn't come out until morning. Dad called the sheriff's office the next day. Deputy Harrison came out, a young man with nervous eyes who took notes while Dad described the sounds. "Could be a panther," Harrison said. "They make some strange noises. Sound almost like a woman screaming sometimes." "In Arkansas?" Mom asked. "Rare, but not impossible. Or could be a fox. They make odd sounds, too." He closed his notebook. "I'll file a report. Let us know if you have any more trouble." 2 nights later, we lost Molly. I'd let her out for her evening bathroom break, standing on the porch to watch. She sniffed around the yard's edge, tail wagging, then suddenly froze. Her ears went back. A low growl started in her throat. She backed toward the house, then turned and bolted, not toward me, but sideways, racing along the house's front. I called after her, but she vanished around the corner. I grabbed a flashlight and followed, Dad right behind me. We found her collar near the barn, torn clean off. No blood, no fur, just the collar lying in the mud, with the buckle still fastened. Dad's light swept the barn's exterior, catching something that made him stop. Deep gouges marked the wood about 7 feet up, 4 parallel lines that had peeled away long strips of paint and wood. They looked like claw marks, but from something impossibly large. "Bear did that," Dad said. "Has to be a bear." But I saw his hand shaking as he lowered the flashlight. We kept Bear inside after that. Sarah barely let him out of her sight, sleeping with her arms around him every night. The house felt smaller, with all of us clustered together, jumping at every creak and groan of the old structure. Dad bought new locks for all the doors, heavy deadbolts that took effort to turn. He didn't say why, but we all knew. The smell started 4 days after Molly vanished. It came with the evening wind, a thick, musty odor like wet dog mixed with rotting vegetation and something else, something wild and unclean. It grew stronger each night, seeping through the windows, even when we kept them closed. Mom burned candles, sprayed air freshener, but nothing masked it. The smell seemed to cling to our clothes, our hair, the furniture itself. "Skunk," Dad said. "Or maybe something died under the house." He spent a whole day crawling through the crawl space with a flashlight, searching for the source. He came up pale and sweating, cobwebs in his hair. "Nothing," he said. "Nothing down there but pipes and dirt." Sarah stopped eating regular meals. Mom stopped humming while she cooked. Dad stopped pretending everything was fine. We moved through the house like guests who'd overstayed our welcome, careful not to disturb something we couldn't name. At night, we gathered in the living room, pretending to watch television while really listening to the darkness outside. The walking started our 3rd week there. Heavy footsteps circled the house after midnight, slow and deliberate. Not the quick scatter of a raccoon or the light pad of a coyote. These were weighted steps that made the porch boards creak. Dad grabbed his shotgun the first night, throwing open the door with the barrel raised. The motion sensor light he'd installed showed nothing but empty yard. The footsteps had stopped the instant he touched the doorknob. "Who's out there?" he shouted into the darkness. No answer came, but that smell rolled over us like a wave, so strong Mom gagged. The next night, Dad and I took shifts sitting by the window with the shotgun across our laps. The footsteps came, at 1:47 a.m. I checked the clock. They started at the back of the house, moving along the north side. Through the window, I saw nothing but black woods and the faint outline of the barn. The steps paused outside the window where I sat. I held my breath, finger on the shotgun safety. A shadow passed across the glass, tall, too tall, blocking what little moonlight filtered through the clouds. Then it moved on, continuing around to the front porch. I wanted to wake Dad, but my voice wouldn't work. The thing, whatever it was, completed its circuit and faded toward the woods. Only then did I realize I'd been holding the shotgun backwards, the barrel pointing at my own chest. Mom broke first. After a week of footsteps and smells and things moving just beyond our sight, she packed a bag one morning and announced she was taking Sarah to stay with her sister in Little Rock. "Just until you figure this out," she told Dad. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her hands shaking as she loaded the station wagon. Sarah cried, not wanting to leave Dad and me, not wanting to leave Bear. "We can't take him to Aunt Janet's," Mom said. "She's allergic. He'll be fine here with David and Dad." They drove away at noon, Mom white-knuckling the steering wheel, Sarah's face pressed against the back window. Dad and I stood on the porch, watching until the car disappeared down the muddy road. When we turned to go inside, we found muddy handprints on the doorframe, 8 feet up with too many fingers. Dad called Deputy Harrison again. This time, an older deputy came, Sergeant Mathis, a thick-set man with gray sideburns who examined the handprints without expression. He took measurements, photographs, scraped samples into evidence bags. "You folks having any other trouble?" he asked. Dad told him everything: the dogs, the sounds, the footsteps. Mathis listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding. When Dad finished, the sergeant was quiet for a long moment. "The Bowmans lived here before you," he said finally. "Lasted 6 months. Before them, the Carraways made it 4. House has been sold 5 times in 3 years. He looked toward the woods. "Folks around here have stories going back to the 30s, maybe further." "Stories about what?" I asked. "Different things. Big footprints in the mud. Livestock gone missing. Things seen moving through the trees that don't match any animal we know." He met Dad's eyes. "I'm not saying I believe it all, but I'm not saying I don't. You might want to consider staying somewhere else for a while." Dad's jaw tightened. "I've got everything invested in this place." Mathis nodded. "I understand, but your family's safety might be worth more than the investment." That night, Dad moved our mattresses into the living room. We pushed them against the far wall, away from all windows. Bear slept between us, occasionally growling at sounds we couldn't hear. The footsteps came earlier, just past dark. They circled the house 3 times, pausing longer at each window. Something scraped against the siding, testing, probing. The doorknob rattled. Bear barked once, then whimpered and hid under the blankets. Around midnight, it started pushing on the walls. The whole house groaned with each impact, pictures falling from their hooks, dishes rattling in the cabinets. Dad held the shotgun, me the baseball bat I'd brought from Indiana. We sat back to back on the mattress, watching different directions, waiting for something to break through. The attack came from above. Something massive hit the roof with enough force to crack rafters. Dust and insulation rained from the ceiling. It moved across the roof in heavy thumps, following the hallway, then into Sarah's room. The ceiling fan in her room crashed down, leaving a hole that showed darkness beyond. A smell poured through. That same musty, wild stench, but concentrated, overwhelming. Dad fired the shotgun straight up through the hole. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space. The thing on the roof screamed, that same shrieking wail we'd heard weeks ago, but louder, angrier. It scrambled across the roof and leaped. We heard it hit the ground outside with a thick thud, then nothing. We sat frozen for maybe an hour, ears ringing, waiting. Finally, Dad stood. "Pack what you can carry. We're leaving." I threw clothes in a bag, while Dad gathered important papers from his office. Bear stayed pressed against my leg, trembling. As we carried our bags to the truck, the motion sensor light clicked on. There, in the mud beside the porch, was a footprint. Not quite human, not quite animal. 3 feet long with 4 toes that ended in deep claw marks. The stride between prints was 8 feet. We drove to a motel in Texarkana that night. Dad called Mom from the payphone, told her to stay in Little Rock, that we were coming. We never went back to the house together. Dad returned once with Deputy Mathis and 2 other men to get our essential belongings. He said the house was trashed, furniture overturned, walls gouged, that hole in Sarah's ceiling expanded to twice its size. Something had been inside after we left, searching. The property was sold at a loss to a development company that planned to clear the land for lumber. Last I heard, they gave up after losing 2 bulldozers, 2 mechanical failures, and 1 operator who quit after something chased him through the woods to his truck. Dad found work in Little Rock, and we settled into a rental house near Mom's sister. A normal house on a normal street where the scariest thing that happened was the neighbor's cat getting in our garbage. Sarah had nightmares for years. Mom never talked about those 3 weeks at all. Dad would sometimes stare at nothing, his hand absently rubbing his shoulder where the shotgun had kicked. I still have one photo from that time. All of us standing on the farmhouse porch that first day, smiling, unaware. In the background, barely visible in the shadow of the trees, there's a shape. Could be a tree trunk, could be shadow, could be nothing. But when I look at it long enough, I swear I can make out eyes watching us, watching and waiting. Bear lived to be 14. Near the end, when his mind started going, he would sometimes growl at empty corners, his fur standing up, backing away from things we couldn't see. The vet said it was just dementia, neurons misfiring. But I remembered how he acted that night in the farmhouse, and I wondered if maybe he could still smell it. That wild, musty scent that meant something enormous and wrong was close. The official police report lists our case as vandalism and wildlife harassment. 3 pages of typed forms, everything reduced to check boxes and case numbers. But Sergeant Mathis included his own handwritten note at the bottom, which I only saw years later when I requested the full file. Family's account consistent with previous incidents at property dating to 1968. Physical evidence documented but inconclusive. Recommended classification, unexplained. Advised against future habitation of property. I went back once, in 1994. I was 39, with a family of my own, driving through Arkansas on business. The exit for Boggy Creek seemed to call to me. The farmhouse still stood, barely. The roof had partially collapsed. Vines strangled the porch, and the windows were all broken. I parked on the road, not trusting the old driveway, and walked to the property line. The woods had reclaimed most of the yard. The barn was just a pile of weathered lumber. But the house itself felt watched, like something still considered it territory. I stood there for maybe 10 minutes, remembering. Then a branch snapped in the woods, too loud, too deliberate. The smell hit me a second later, faint but unmistakable. I walked back to my car without running, but it took all my willpower. As I drove away, I checked the rear view mirror and saw something step out of the tree line. It stood upright, massive, watching my car disappear down the road. I never told my wife why I came home a day early from that trip. Never told my kids why I insisted on living in suburbs, in neighborhoods with streetlights and neighbors close enough to hear you scream. Some things you carry alone, locked away, except in those 3 a.m. moments when every house sound becomes footsteps. Every shadow could be something waiting. The Boggy Creek area is famous now. There was a movie in 1972, documentaries, books, tourist attractions. People come from all over hoping to spot the Fook monster, treating it like some roadside attraction. They don't understand that the thing about monsters isn't that they're scary stories. It's that sometimes they're real, and they remember the places they've claimed. I still have that photo, tucked in a box in the attic. Sometimes I think about burning it, cutting that last tie to those 3 weeks. But I keep it as proof, mostly for myself. Proof that it happened, that we survived, that sometimes the only sane response to the impossible is to run. Sarah called me last week. Her son is house hunting, looking for something with land, something away from the city. She wanted to know if I remembered the exact address of our old farmhouse. Said she had a bad feeling but couldn't remember why. I told her I didn't remember. I lied. Some places should stay forgotten. Some properties should remain unsold. And some things in the woods should be left alone to walk their territories in the dark, leaving only footprints and the memory of fear. The farmhouse is still listed in county records, still technically for sale, though no realtor will show it anymore. Every few years, someone buys it, sight unseen, drawn by the rock-bottom price. They never last long. The lucky ones leave, like we did, in the middle of the night, with whatever they can carry. The unlucky ones, well, there have been 3 missing person cases in Miller County since 1971 that remain unsolved. All 3 had recently purchased property along Boggy Creek. I'm 68 now, retired, living in Phoenix where the desert is bright and open and nothing can hide. My wife thinks I moved us here for the warm winters. She's wrong. I moved us here because you can see for miles in every direction, because the nights are never truly dark, because nothing that large could move without being seen. But sometimes on humid nights, when the moon is hidden by clouds, that smell comes back to me. Not really there, just memory, but strong enough to make my hands shake. Strong enough to make me check the locks, turn on the lights, sit up listening for footsteps that will never come. Because we got away. We were lucky. The thing about luck, though, is that it feels less like escape and more like borrowed time. Like somewhere in Arkansas, in woods that have grown thicker and darker over the decades, something still remembers the family that lived in its territory for 3 weeks in 1971. Still remembers and waits, patient as the trees, for us to forget and come back. We never will. But sometimes, in my worst dreams, I'm 16 again, standing on that porch with a flashlight, calling for Duke. The beam barely penetrates the darkness between the trees. Something moves out there, just beyond the light's reach. It's been waiting for me to come looking. It's always been waiting. I wake up gasping, fumbling for the bedside lamp. My wife stirs, asks if I'm okay. I tell her yes, just a bad dream. But I stay awake the rest of the night, listening to the suburban sounds of sprinklers and distant traffic, grateful for every bit of noise that proves I'm far from those woods. The investigators who came later, the cryptozoologists, the writers, the documentary crews, they all asked the same question. What do you think it was? I gave them all the same answer. I don't know. That's the truth, but not the whole truth. The whole truth is that not knowing is the only thing that lets me sleep at all. Because if I knew, if I could name it, classify it, understand it, then I'd have to accept that it exists. That it's out there, real as rain, walking through the dark woods along Boggy Creek. And once you accept that, you have to accept everything else. That there are things we don't understand, things we can't control, things that see us not as humans, not as threats, but as intruders in territories older than memory. The rational world we've built, with its streetlights and deadbolts and sheriff's departments, is thinner than we think. And in some places, it tears. Boggy Creek is one of those tears. The farmhouse sits right at the edge of it, a boundary between our world and something else. Every family that's lived there has felt it. Some run, some disappear. Some, like the previous owner, who broke his lease, refused to speak about what they saw at all. But we speak about it, Sarah and I, once a year on the anniversary of our escape. We call each other, usually late at night, and without planning it, we end up talking about those 3 weeks. Not the creature, we never directly mention that, but the smaller details. The way Mom's hands shook, the sound of Dad's voice when he said we were leaving, the way Bear whimpered. These shared memories are proof it happened, that we didn't imagine it, because sometimes, in the normal light of day, it feels impossible, like something we must have exaggerated over time, trauma making monsters out of memory. Then I remember the physical evidence, the photographs Sergeant Mathis took, the claw marks measured and documented, the footprints preserved in plaster casts that probably still sit in some evidence box in Miller County. Real things that say, yes, this happened. I've read the theories over the years. Escaped ape, undiscovered primate, mass hysteria, hoaxes for attention. But theories are for people who weren't there, who didn't smell that thick, wild scent, who didn't feel their house shake when something too large to be real struck the walls, who didn't see their dogs disappear, one by one, taken by something that moved through familiar woods like it owned them. The truth is simpler and worse. We don't know everything. The woods are older than us, deeper than our maps show, full of spaces we've never found. And in some of those spaces, things live that we're not meant to encounter. Things that were here before us and will be hereafter. The farmhouse still stands. I check the satellite images sometimes, watching as the forest slowly swallows it. In another decade, maybe 2, it will be gone completely. The land will look empty, pristine, perfect for development. Someone will buy it, clear it, try to build again. And then some night, when the air is thick with the smell of creek mud and rotting vegetation, they'll hear footsteps circling their new house. They'll find their pets missing. They'll see handprints too high on their walls with too many fingers. And if they're smart, if they're lucky, they'll run. Like we did. that night in 1971, leaving everything behind but our lives. Driving through the dark with something massive moving through the trees alongside the road, keeping pace with the truck for a mile before finally falling back. We made it out. We survived. We carried on with our lives. But survival isn't the same as escape. Not really. Because once you know that something like that exists, once you felt it watching you, testing your defenses, claiming you as part of its territory, you never really leave. Part of you stays there, forever frozen in that moment of recognition. We are not alone. We are not safe. And we never were.